is my pleasure today to introduce our next plenary in the stead of Hannah Eagleson, who asked me to step in, which is no problem. Francis Sue is a longtime friend and prayer partner, a colleague at Harvey Mudd College. We actually teach together this fall. He is the Benedictson Carwa Professor of Mathematics at Harvey Mudd College. It's in Claremont, California, near Los Angeles, not far from here. He's been there for over 25 years. He's earned a variety of accolades in both teaching and research. He has been given many awards. He's very well known for his talk that he gave at a meeting in response to winning a math award, The Lesson of Grace in Teaching, which I encourage you to look up. You can just Google that. It's fantastic. And then more recently, his book that he published, Mathematics for Human Flourishing, which is also the title of his talk. So please, with me, welcome Francis Sue.
Thank you so much. Thanks to the organizers for the opportunity to speak. What does mathematics have to do with being human? That's what I want to talk about today. And as I'm now speaking to a conference on science and faith, I might even ask, what does math have to do with being a human with spiritual desires? Every being cries out silently to be read differently. This painting by George Frederick Watts in 1886 is entitled Hope. Take a moment to look at it as a work of art. What do you notice about the painting? And what do you wonder? That's my toddler. Perhaps the beauty of the painting draws you in, right? Maybe gradually you grasp the elements of the painting and their relationship to one another. You see a blindfolded figure sitting atop a globe, in despair, plucking a lyre with only a single unbroken string. She strains to hear its music. And only after some time do you notice in the background a single lone star up in the top corner, shining just out of her view. And you wonder, why is she blindfolded? Why is she in despair? What does the star represent? And why is this painting entitled Hope? So then you seek to find out more context, don't you? You learn that in the 1880s, the world was going through a depression called the Long Depression. You might see then that the painting captures a certain pessimism of the times. In 1959, Martin Luther King wrote a sermon entitled Shattered Dreams, based on this painting, in which he asks, who has not had to face the agony of blasted hopes and shattered dreams? And yet this harpist, in strumming this last string, straining to hear its music, has the audacity of hope, inspiring the title of a memoir by a young senator many years later from Illinois named Obama. Now, why do I open with this art? It's because we see it and we engage with it, because we all have basic human desires. It's beautiful and we desire beauty. It's relevant to our current moment and we desire meaning. It's captivating and we desire to explore it. It causes us to wonder, to ask questions, to seek its truth, to be willing to be patient in waiting for a star to show itself. How come we don't approach math the same way that we approach art? Every being cries out silently to be read differently. 7 years ago, actually 9 years ago now, I received a letter out of the blue from an inmate in a federal prison. His name is Christopher Jackson. He's been in prison since he was a teenager, got involved with drugs, never finished high school. And after a series of armed robberies that he was involved in, he landed him in prison with a 32-year sentence. You might ask, when you think about who does mathematics, would you think of Christopher? And yet he wrote me this letter after 7 years in prison, and he said, I've always had a proclivity for mathematics, but being in a very early stage of youth and living in some adverse circumstances, I never came to understand the true meaning and benefit of pursuing an education. You see, Chris had studied his way through a series of math textbooks, and he was writing me for help in furthering his math education. So I ask again, when you think of who does mathematics, would you think of Christopher? And yet his insights have inspired me, a professional mathematician, to believe even more fully that math has something to offer everyone. Every being cries out silently to be read differently. That's a quote from Simone Weil, who is a well-known French religious mystic and a widely revered philosopher. She's probably less well-known as the younger sister of a famous mathematician, one of the most famous mathematicians of the 20th century, André Weil. And for Simone, to read someone means to interpret or make a judgment about them. She's saying every being cries out silently to be judged differently. And I sometimes wonder if she were crying out about herself, because she too loved and participated in mathematics, but she was always comparing herself to her brother. She says this, quote, "At 14, I fell into one of those fits of bottomless despair that come with adolescence, and I seriously thought of dying because of the mediocrity of my natural faculties. The exceptional gifts of my brother, who had a childhood and youth comparable to that of Pascal, brought my own inferiority home to me. I didn't mind having no visible successes, but what did grieve me was the idea of being excluded from that transcendent kingdom to which only the truly great have access and wherein truth abides. And I preferred to die rather than live without that truth." Now, we know that Simone loved mathematics because you'll find mathematical examples throughout her philosophical writing. And you'll find her also in photos of Bourbaki. This is a group of influential French mathematicians that included her brother. Her brother is the one waving the bell, and Simone is sitting at left, poring over some notes. She's the lone woman here among a bunch of men, and I often wonder what her relationship to mathematics would be like if she weren't always in André's shadow. Every being cries out silently to be read differently. Now, of course, you might think that I, a math professor, that my relationship to math has always been solid. Maybe you think I've never struggled in math. But I grew up in a small town in rural South Texas. Yes, that's me, back when I had hair. This town had limited opportunities. Most of my high school peers didn't go to college. I had supportive teachers who encouraged me in high school and at college, and I managed to get admitted to Harvard for my PhD. But I felt out of place there because unlike them, I didn't come from an Ivy League school, and unlike them, I didn't have a full slate of graduate courses before I entered. And I felt like Simone, standing next to future Andres, thinking I would never be able to flourish if I were not like them. And I had one professor even tell me that I didn't have what it takes to be a successful mathematician. And that unkind remark forced me to consider, among other things, why I wanted to do mathematics. And that's a question I want all of us to ask. Why do mathematics? Right? Why is Christopher sitting in a prison cell studying calculus that he'll most likely never use, or at least not for another 20 years? Why was Simone so captivated by transcendent mathematical truths? And why should anybody persist in doing math when others are telling her in subtle and maybe not subtle ways that she doesn't belong? And society is also asking what its relationship to mathematics should be, right? Is math only a tool to make you, quote, college and career ready? Or is math unnecessary for most of us and only for the elite few? Why study math if you'll never use what you're learning, right? These are questions that arise because math is often only seen as a means to an end, a tool that you're going to use later rather than a pursuit that serves you well right now. Right? And so when kids ask, when will I ever use this? What they're really asking is, when will I ever value this? And they are equating value with utility because they haven't been shown that they can value anything more. And yet in a Florida prison, Christopher has never asked this question, when will I ever use this, has he? He's poring over textbooks, learning math in hopeful anticipation of its own intrinsic rewards. And so if you asked me, why do mathematics? I would say this. It's because, one more point I want to make here. All of us are asking about our relationships to mathematics, and it all matters. And in many ways, all of us are math teachers, right? And even if you don't teach math professionally like I do, right? We're math teachers because we all pass on attitudes about mathematics to others, right? We create societal norms around who does math and who doesn't do math. And so if you asked me, why do mathematics, I would say this. It's because mathematics helps people flourish. Mathematics, I would say, is for human flourishing. And I love that that's the theme of this conference. And when I say human flourishing, I'm referring to a certain wholeness, both of being and of doing, of realizing one's potential and helping others to do the same, of acting with honor, in treating others with dignity, the God-given dignity that they have, of living with integrity, even in challenging circumstances. And so human flourishing is not the same as happiness, and it's not just a state of mind. One way to think about human flourishing is the well-lived life, right? The ancient Greeks had a word for this, eudaimonia. There's a similar word in Hebrew, shalom, which is often used as a greeting, often translated peace. But when you say shalom to someone, you're wishing that they would flourish and live well. In Arabic, has a related word used in the same way, salam. And a basic question taken up by philosophers throughout the ages is, how do you achieve this human flourishing? What is the well-lived life? Now, Aristotle would say flourishing comes about through the exercise of virtue. You can think of virtue as a certain excellence of character that leads to an excellence of conduct, right? So there's a being aspect and a doing aspect. And it includes more than just moral virtue. So here I might enlarge what Aristotle says. For instance, courage, wisdom, persistence, and problem solving, right? These are also virtues. And so what I'm hoping to convince you of today is that these virtues are often much more important than skills. And so when you think of mathematical skills, I'm thinking of things like knowing how to factor a quadratic, knowing how to apply some formula, right? Those are skills. Just to convince you of this, let me share with you a question that a student of mine said that they interviewed for some high-powered job on Wall Street and were asked this question. How many times has a toilet flushed in New York City during commercial break of the Super Bowl? Take a moment to think how you might answer that question. Of course, what you're thinking is, why in the world were they asking this question? Why were they asking this question? Well, do you think they really cared how many times the toilet is flushed? No. They're asking that question because they wanted to see how the candidate thinks, right? What's the thought process? What kind of virtues do they have? And so doing mathematics cultivates virtues, is what I hope to convince you of today. And this movement towards virtue happens through basic human desires that all of us have. So for instance, beauty is one desire. I'm going to go through a number of different desires and try to convince you that math is human because we're drawn, just like every human, to basic desires, like beauty. What happens when you see something beautiful? Well, you pause and you reflect, right? You stand in awe of a beautiful painting and you search for its meaning, right? I encountered this piece of cauliflower in a supermarket in the United Kingdom. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. What? That's a fractal, right? I'd never seen fractal cauliflower before, right? It's a striking pattern, beautiful pattern. And it causes you to stop, to reflect, and to ask why, right? So why, that question takes you from a certain sensory beauty where you first encounter beautiful patterns through the senses to wondrous beauty, the beauty of ideas, like this idea in calculus that you can add an infinite number of things and actually figure out the sum. But then that might take you to another deeper kind of beauty, and this might be a form of beauty that's unique to mathematics, insightful beauty, the beauty of reasoning. And I claim that this picture actually says the same thing as that equation just above it. Why? If you take a square and you cut it into 4 pieces, and you color 3 of them, and take the remaining corner and cut it into 4 pieces and color 3 of them, and you keep going, then the sum of the areas of the red squares is the left side of that equation. But the sum of the areas of the red, green, and blue are all the same because they match up square for square. And that's 1/3 of the size of the square, which is the right side of the equation. If you like that, just go, whoa. Right? The fact that you can grasp why that's true in such a beautiful way, it's amazing. Right? It's like you look at that and you say, wait a minute, can I do this with other equations? And I'm sure some of you are trying this right now, right? Like, maybe I can take this farther. This is the beauty of reasoning. And then there's even beyond that, a deeper form of mathematical beauty, maybe the deepest, which is I like to call transcendent beauty, right? It's what happens when you see the same beautiful object, idea, or reasoning pop up in multiple places. It's like the universe is opening up and speaking to you, right? That kind of beauty can feel sublime, almost divine. And the transcendent beauty we find in the world provokes in us a feeling that there's just something beyond our grasp waiting to be found that may be of ultimate meaning. I like what C.S. Lewis said about sublime experiences of beauty as the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have not visited. In a similar way, math can feel this way. When you see the same idea, transcendent truth pop up everywhere, and when you realize you've had exactly the same mathematical thoughts as another human being who's separated from you by oceans, culture, or time, you begin to believe there might be some universal, enduring reality that you're somehow both accessing. Eugene Wigner, a famous physicist, said this: "The miracle of the appropriateness of the language of math to the formulation of the laws of physics is a wonderful gift, which we neither understand nor deserve." Right? He's evoking transcendent beauty. But what does beauty do for us? It cultivates in us certain virtues, like reflection, when you contemplate a beautiful idea just like you'd contemplate a beautiful forest. It leads to joyful gratitude. It leads to transcendent awe. And when we see the same idea everywhere, we begin to build in us, this is one of the most important virtues of mathematics, habits of generalization, because we begin to expect overarching patterns everywhere. Right? Not everybody does that, right? Looks at things and says, oh, there must be some overarching pattern. But mathematicians trained to do that. So when I learn a new idea in math, I often ask, what gives this theorem its power? What's the underlying principle? How does it apply in a more general situation? And such habits carry over to other areas of my life, right? When I'm cooking a stir fry and I learn a new recipe, I often ask, what general principles does this recipe teach me? Right? Add garlic and chopped onions first, right? And everybody knows you don't put in the green leaves until the very end, otherwise they're going to lose their color. Right? These are general principles. And why is that great? It's because, you know what? I don't like to have to memorize recipes, right? If I understand principles, I can improvise. Right? This habit of general cooking principles or mathematical principles allows you to improvise new delights. This is mathematical, the virtues cultivated by looking for beauty. And so if you are teaching math, and of course I've just argued that all of us are math teachers in some way, whether it's your students or your kids or people that you love, how do you teach beauty? You make space for reflection. You look for patterns everywhere in art, music, rhythm, culture, elegant ideas, reasoning. I often ask my students to write, and I'll make this part of an exam, a question. Consider one idea from the course you found beautiful. Explain why it's beautiful to you. Tell me how it's different or similar to other kinds of beauty that human beings encounter. You can see a number of reflection questions. I have a blog post if you just Google 7 exam questions for a pandemic. You'll find it, and others. I also have a website called Math Fun Facts that tries to showcase interesting or beautiful mathematical ideas. Here's another basic human desire for exploration. Now, when I was a kid, I loved astronomy, loved the stars. Of course, I grew up in a small town in South Texas, so I actually could see stars, unlike here in LA. At the time, there were the Voyager probes that were going through the solar system, taking pictures like these, the first pictures of close-up of the rings of Saturn. Exploration, you see, is a deep human desire, isn't it? It's a mark of human flourishing. And math exploration is actually very much similar to space exploration, but a different kind of space. It's a space of ideas. You don't know what you'll find when you start to explore. You send out probes to test theories, and just like beautiful art, when you encounter the beauty of math, you're captivated by mystery. You're motivated by questions. You're unfazed by setbacks. And you make discoveries from a distance, don't you? Because the ideas themselves aren't physical. You access this space through reason. And exploration's at the heart of what it means to do math, right? And you don't need a lot of resources to be a math explorer. You just need your mind. So you can embark on an adventure from anywhere. A prison, a small rural town, or even a far-flung corner of the earth. And what does exploration do for us in mathematics? It cultivates virtues like imagination and creativity, right? In order to solve problems, in order to create the next great gizmo, you have to dream up new possibilities. And one of the best virtues of mathematics is you learn how to visualize patterns, to see the unseen. That's the way I often describe it to my students. You begin to envision the hidden structures that underlie everything we encounter. And exploration builds in us. This is one of the most important virtues, I would say, underrated, most people don't think about, is the expectation of enchantment. Right? Aren't explorers excited about finding weird and wonderful things? Right? Like when they went to the rings of Saturn, believe it or not, they found moons so there are these moons that shepherd the rings, that actually cause the rings in some interesting mathematical ways. But even weirder than that, they found shepherding moons that actually switch orbits every now and then. You're like, what? I didn't know things like that could happen. That's weird and wonderful. That's enchantment, right? Or the deep sea ocean floor, right? Like, whoa, would you have ever thought of a fish having a light at the end of its nose? Right? Weird and wonderful. That's what keeps you coming back for more. That's what it should look like in a math classroom. One of my friends showed me this. I'd never seen it before. It's a cube cut. It's a Menger sponge is what it's called. Take a cube and you cut out lots of cubes and squares, right? And he sliced it and he said, "Do you know what happens when you slice this cube?" And I'm like, "No. I have no idea." Okay, if you like this, you have to ooh and ah, okay? Here's what happens. What? Hexagonal stars? What's up with it? That's one of those moments where I'm like, wait a minute, give me those pieces. I have to look, you start looking from different angles, right? That's what a good mathematical experience should be like. Where you want to take the pieces and look closer and say, what just happened there? Right? That's the expectation of enchantment. And so, we learn to expect enchantment around every corner. And that's what keeps people coming back. During the pandemic, it wouldn't surprise you then to learn that the sales of puzzles went through the roof. Why? That's mathematical thinking, puzzling. Mathematical thinking, and it's a form of diversion. It's enchantment, keeping your mind off the many weird things going on in the world, right? That's enchantment. And so what does exploration do for us? It builds in us virtue. So how do you teach exploration? How do you teach exploration? Well, so one of the things is to change dull problems to exploratory problems, right? A dull problem is asking a kid 20 times to multiply two numbers together, right? Okay, so there may be a reason for doing that. That's drilling in certain skills, automaticity, and things like that. But that's not the heart of math. And we need to help our students realize, hey, I'm doing this just, so that you develop some automaticity, but that's not mathematics. Mathematics is more about being exploratory, right? So if you ask a kid to multiply two numbers together to compute the area, they'll never really learn what an area is. They just learn some formula. But if you ask them a different question, I like this one from Ben Orland's book, Math with Bad Drawing. Create two rectangles so that the first has a bigger perimeter and the second has a bigger area. More interesting. Many different ways you could answer the problem students can make progress on, right? Open-ended questions are a way to be more exploratory. I like to tell my students, in this class, great questions are better than good answers, right? I even reward my students for asking good questions. I tell my students, I'm training you to be a math explorer, to think, to reason, to solve problems you've never seen before, right? I'm not teaching you to follow recipes, which is often what a math experience looks like for students. Here's another basic desire. It's actually closely related to exploration, and that is the desire to play. And you think about many ways that human beings like to play. There's sports play, there's musical play, beach play, word play. And one of the first activities babies engage in is play. One of the visions of the New Jerusalem in the book of Zechariah is kids playing in the streets. Now, what is play? Well, it's hard to characterize, but there's usually some structure, like the rules of a game or musical chords. There's also freedom within that structure, and that freedom leads to exploration of some sort, like, improvisation when you're playing jazz. Play is often whimsical, right? There's no great stake in the outcome, and it often leads to some kind of surprise, like a satisfying pun or the thrilling end to a football game. Now, of course, animals play too, but what characterizes human play is the enlarged role of the mind and the imagination. You see, math makes the mind its playground. And math play builds in us virtues that enable us to flourish in every area of our lives. For instance, you build hopefulness and concentration. When you sit with a puzzle long enough, you're exercising hope that you'll eventually solve it, right? Not everybody has that hope that hard problems can be solved. Hard problems in their lives can be solved. That's one of the great levelers of education, the reason education is so powerful. It builds in us perseverance, just as weekly soccer practices build up muscles that make us stronger for the next game. Weekly math homework sets make us more fit for solving that next problem, whatever that is, even if we don't solve the current problem. Right? That's what play does for us. Play is part of human flourishing. So we need to think about as how we teach play, right? Invite questions. There should be elements of surprise and imagination. I like to de-emphasize the role of grades as a measure of progress, but it's not your measure of promise. I value process, not just outcome, right? I ask my students, what have you learned in this class about the process of doing or creating math? We have to make it a playful sport, not a performance sport. Here's another basic human desire for truth. Pontius Pilate's question, what is truth? Right? And of course, this is an important question today with so much disinformation, stoked often by social media, right? What is truth? Many of my friends look at the news and say, gosh, it's so hard to even figure out what's going on. Why should I even bother? But truth is a mark of human flourishing. It's a basic human desire. Flourishing society values truth, while societies that suppress truth have historically been oppressive. Hannah Arendt, a political theorist in another turbulent time, studied totalitarian regimes, and she said this in her essay, Truth and Politics. She said, the result of a consistent and total substitution of lies for truth is not that the lies will now be accepted as truth. I mean, that's a problem. But what she's saying is, It's that the sense by which we take our bearings in the real world are being destroyed. Why should I even bother, right? We begin to care less about what's true when we lose our bearings. We're more easily manipulated. But mathematical thinking equips us to figure out what's going on and to bother, right? Math explorers are on a quest for truth. We want to see how far the rabbit hole goes. We have a confidence that truth exists and it's worth finding out. And so in math, even when I produce an answer to a question I'm trying to solve, I don't take the answer for granted. I ask, why is the answer reasonable? Where does it come from? Why is it implied by what's already known? Is there another way of getting at this truth? If I see two different ways of getting at the same answer, I have confidence that I have the right answer. Right? This is the virtue then of mathematics in building desire, in seeking truth. It builds in us a thirst for deep knowledge and deep investigation, right? It makes me look at the things going on in the world, whether it's the discovery of gravity waves, whether it's a pandemic, and ask, how does this fit in with what I know? How do these models, how does the amazing discovery that we can look at the universe through gravity waves, how does that relate to the geometry I learned in high school? It causes us to start thinking for oneself, not relying on authority to figure stuff out. It also should build in us a healthy humility about what we know and what we don't know. It teaches us to handle the truth accurately. And of course, there's a lot at stake here if we don't learn mathematics well, right? It's ability to make informed decisions, to be innovators, not just consumers, to critique the uses of math and technology, to not be duped. These are all things that math helps us do. Here's another basic human desire for power. Now, of course, this is a strange one, you're probably thinking, because you're used to thinking of power like it's a bad word, right? But I like what the writer Andy Crouch says about power in a recent book. He says, power is the ability to make something of the world, the ability to participate in the stuff-making, sense-making process that is the most distinctive things that human beings do. So stuff-making is like transformation. Sense-making is like imagination. And so I like to distinguish between this kind of creative power that enables sense-making from coercive power, which limits the abilities of others for creative power. And that's the kind that we're used to thinking of when we think about the bad uses of power. And math builds in us certain powers, right? In every classroom, in every kind of math course, you're learning to interpret, to define, to quantify, to abstract, to visualize, to imagine, to create, to strategize, right? There are all these different things you're learning in a math class. And these, my friends, are the things that you carry with you the rest of your lives in every profession, whether or not you go into math or not, right? These are the things that will benefit you later. That's power. My friend Christopher talks about another kind of power, actually, and this sort of gets back to the idea that math actually helps you see. If you see multiple ways of doing things, you have a certain freedom to see your options. And he's an avid chess player. We've played chess a couple times now in prison, and he's good. He beat me both times. He said this. It's a sign of a skilled chess player that he or she can play well out of any position or circumstance on the board. The person who's unaware of his or her options is like a player who's in a bad position. Because even if there are fruitful paths available to you that you are not aware of, they may as well not exist. He's saying that if you don't know what's available to you, it's like those fruitful paths don't exist. But education is the great leveler. By climbing our visions of ourselves, education allows us to transcend ourselves and help others to do the same. So this brings me to another basic human desire that all of us have, and it's a very biblical desire, the desire for justice. Simone Weil's larger quote says that justice is being ever ready to admit that another person is something completely different from what we read in him. And I have this picture here because it's a picture. By the way, these graphics were created for my book from my friend Carl Olson. They're beautiful pictures. And for the chapter on justice, I asked them to draw a picture of a Chinese restaurant. And the reason I did that is that this reminds me of my favorite Chinese restaurant, which, I go to this restaurant near school that serves authentic Chinese cuisine. But, it's sometimes slightly annoying that, while the food is authentic, they bring out these appetizers that are not authentic, these little crunchy noodles. And they bring out Jell-O at the end. Like, Jell-O's not Chinese, right? But then one day I went there with a Chinese-speaking friend. And when the appetizer came, it was these delectable pickled cucumbers. I'm like, what? I'd never seen those before. And my friend hadn't made any special request. And when the dessert came, it wasn't Jell-O, but it was this wonderful red bean soup, like my mom used to make. How come I hadn't gotten this before? I began to see a pattern. Whenever I came to this restaurant with non-Asian friends, I would get crunchies and Jell-O. When I came with Asian friends, I got the good stuff without even asking for it. And then, of course, after you frequent enough places like this, you realize that if you go to the really, really authentic restaurants, they actually hand Chinese people a completely different menu, the secret menu. You're like, what? Well, part of the problem is that it's in Chinese, so you're probably going to have a little bit of an obstacle. But even when I ask for that menu, I present Chinese, right? I am Chinese, I'm Chinese American, so I don't speak Chinese, but even when I ask for that menu, the waiters will often tell me, oh, no. You won't like the stuff on that menu, right? I'm like, what? No, I grew up with that stuff. Now, why do I tell this story? It's because it caused me to reflect one day that actually mathematical spaces are like this. We do this with people, right? We shepherd some people towards math toys and games and puzzles. I have been guilty in the past of sending some students saying, hey, you should take another math class. And then I tell other students, when they express an interest, thinking to myself secretly, for your benefit, you probably shouldn't take a math class, right? Like, we do this. And often it's our unconscious biases, these assumptions that we make that, again, forget the fact that students are on a journey and grades are just a snapshot. They're not a measure of your mathematical promise. So if you believe that mathematics is for human flourishing, you have to want that everybody has an opportunity to do mathematics. I think it's an obligation for all of us, especially in this time, to learn how to teach justly, to learn about inclusive teaching, to think about who gets to speak in our class and who gets shut down, to not always talk about students as if they're just lacking things, but remembering the things that they bring. I've written a few articles about some of these things, which you can find on my website. But how can you recognize and value each student's contributions? This gets back to Josh's talk yesterday, right? Somebody asked, what do I do to start being inclusive? A good place to start is to start listening to our students. And what virtues does this build when we attend to math in this way? You begin to build a concern for the marginalized, a willingness to challenge the status quo. So to sum up, there's one thing I want you to take away from this talk is that we should all seek to grow in virtues, not just skills. When we think about mathematics, we have to fight the one-dimensional view of math, right? Too often we're focused on achievement, as if math can be measured by some one-dimensional linear scale. Right? In elementary school, it often looks like speed. People think about, if you can't do math fast, then you can't be good. And that's totally, totally not the case, right? As a professional mathematician, being fast isn't important at all, right? We need to start thinking of math as multidimensional. Yes, students have different strengths. This student is good at putting pieces together. This one is good at a lot of technical things. This one actually has this expectation of enchantment, this joy, this ability to engage with a problem, to be persistent with problem solving, right? The math is multidimensional. I think that's our obligation to think about math that way. We have to remind people that the virtues cultivated by mathematics are part of mathematics as well. See, you can't separate the true practice of math from what it means to be human, right? If you want to teach or if you want to learn math well, you have to see how it connects to your human longings. So that's my challenge then for all of us today is to believe that you and everyone in your life can flourish in mathematics, right? I know that's hard. It's a challenge for me too. I've fallen short of this ideal. I've written off kids often because I don't have the imagination that I need for the sacred responsibility of teaching, right? If I did, I might have read them differently. Going back to Chris, now several years after he wrote me that first letter from prison, he's helping other inmates to learn math to get their GEDs, right? He's now studying advanced mathematics, abstract algebra, topology. And he says this, right? Like, picture this kid, high school kid, right? If I had been his teacher, I might have thought he was lazy, right? Disinterested. This is what he said in a letter to me. He said, "These days I'm studying anywhere between 3 to 5 hours, Monday through Friday, and 2+ hours Saturday and Sunday, depending on how I'm feeling. It's harder to study and read here because you're not in a traditional cell with a cell door that you can be enclosed in. I'm in a room without a desk, so I have to take 2 chairs to do studying in. But hopefully that'll change soon because I'm in the works of trying to move to a cube with a desk. But I can't complain too much. I grab my earplugs, my 2 chairs, and I go to work." See, nobody would call him lazy or disinterested now, right? Would I have had the imagination to see a math future for him if I were his teacher? Believe that you and everyone in your life can flourish in math. See, what I'm asking you to do is something you already know is at the heart of every virtue and anything meaningful in our lives. Right? I'm asking you to love, right? It's the greatest human desire. To love and be loved is the supreme mark of human flourishing. Every being cries out silently to be read differently, right? Chris wasn't just looking for mathematical advice, was he? Right? He was looking for connection. He was looking for somebody to reach out to him in his mathematical space and say, "I see you." And when I was in the depths of despair in grad school, ready to give up, one professor reached out to me. And he said, "I'd rather see you work with me than quit." Who will you love? Who will you read differently? You see, everybody is a math person, right? And your deepest human desires reveal your mathematical nature, and you might only need to awaken it. And if that's the case, then to love another human being is to see each one worthy of the beauty and the joy and the human dignity that come from understanding. Who will you read differently? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francis. That was fantastic. We're going to have opportunity for questions. So Tom and Louise are working the aisles. So if you have a question, raise your hand. They will come to you and then wave around so we can see you. So we know that Josh is going to ask the first question. Go ahead, Josh.
Hey, thanks a lot, Francis. It's really beautiful, the journey you've been on and how you've been faithful to Jesus in it. I wanted to know if you could comment on what I've observed is that this has really been engaged by a lot of secular audiences, including in the mathematical community. And I think that's really rare for I mean, this could have been pigeonholed as a Christian book, right? But somehow this has actually has really spoken to a much larger community. I wonder if you could tell us some more about that, and also what you think you did that made that possible.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, obviously the journey that I've been on has been a spiritual journey since graduate school. So I became a follower of Jesus in college, and so I was rather new believer going to grad school. Actually, when I went to grad school, I was already asking questions. I was like, wait a minute, is doing math actually part of God's plan for me, right? Like, maybe I should be doing more explicitly Christian work, whatever that is, right? I didn't really have this this formation of the identity that my vocation, in my vocation, that I could be serving God's purposes. And I don't think I had a very clear picture of, like, doing math to me felt selfish. It felt like, gosh, I enjoy this, but like maybe it's not helping anybody, right? I don't know, maybe some of you felt that way in science as well, potentially, right? And so, there was a great deal of soul searching. My identity was wrapped up in getting a PhD, and because that was always my parents' marker of success, right? And so when I was up in this position where I could actually lose this dream of getting a PhD, that was, in many ways, it was dying to that dream that opened up a lot of soul searching, right? Like, why did I really need this PhD? Is it really just to give me dignity, to make me elite? And so once I was satisfied with this idea that I actually could give this up and I didn't need this to give me dignity, that was also formed by my Christian experience and understanding that my dignity comes in God and God alone. Then that was when this other professor said, "Hey, I said, Percy, I think I'm going to quit." And he said, "Oh, you should work with me." Right? And he'd already, and this is part of the story I tell in this other speech, the lesson of grace and teaching. He'd probably already heard from the other professors that I was a problem student. The one that had gone through 2 PhD advisors and still not, like in my 4th year, it was kind of that situation. And so, okay, so I guess that's a long-winded way of getting around to your question. Part of, I think, what I've begun to see, aside from what I've begun to see in my journey here, is that, part of the message, the idea that you get your dignity not from the things you do, but because of who you are. You are a human being, made in God's image, as I would say, right? That is a beautiful message. That's the message that's at the heart of the gospel. That message is appealing, right? That message is appealing to people. And why is it appealing? Because it's a gospel message. It's a piece of that message, right? And, but it's also a hard message, right? Like when you say that to people, some people get ruffled feathers, right? When I gave this other talk about the lesson of grace and teaching, and I said that, actually somebody came up to me afterwards and said, I disagree with what you said. Like I think my dignity does come from my accomplishments, right? And so, that's to be expected, I think, from the gospel message, is it's going to be a hard message, but a good message. And so this message, I think, is it's a hard message and a good message as well, in the sense that it's a spiritually formed message. We all have dignity. We all should have the opportunity to be captivated by mathematics, which is God's good creation. But it's a hard message because people are used to getting their identity from using math as a elitist tool rather than something that should enable all human beings to flourish. And so, I'm sure it has pushback, but, it ties into, that God cares about justice. God cares about the poor and the oppressed and the people who society shuns. And so part of this message that I am delivering now to secular audiences is who are the people we're forgetting? That should resonate with people.
Thank you. A question over on the side here.
I have a slightly strange question. Where is Chris now? And I feel like there's somebody in here who would pray for you and pray for Chris.
Yes, please pray for Chris. Chris is still in the Florida prison. He's doesn't have the possibility of parole, which is sad, but that's in the federal prison system. That's the way it is. He was sentenced for two crimes. Each would have given him 7 years, but our legal system said the second 7 should be 25. And so 7 plus 7 is 32, apparently, right? I think that's highly unjust. The 2018 First Step Act that was passed by Congress actually reduced sentences like the one he was convicted of, but not retroactively. So one opportunity for relief for Chris, who's already served 14 years, by the way, is to have the laws changed. So you can pray for, but you can also ask your congressperson to seek a second Step Act. The reason for that law was to reduce recidivism. But Chris committed those crimes at the same time. So these are so-called stacking laws. So one wonderful thing that actually came about through prayer and a church connection is that his case is now being taken up by a lawyer, a prominent lawyer who was a trial judge that sentenced many people like him for those crimes. And now he's working to try to change the system. And so that's a possibility for hope. But there aren't that many legal remedies available. But I was encouraged that this lawyer is taking up his case in pro bono. Chris and I keep in contact now. Every couple of weeks or so, we communicate through Core Links, which is an arcane email system that exists. You can't send figures, you can only send text, that kind of thing. He's doing well, he has his ups and downs. I'm not sure what else to say, but he's now 30, he's in his early 30s, maybe 32, 33. Yeah. He's still got another 17 or 18 years. In many ways, people often hear this story and say, gosh, Chris is like amazing, right? You discovered the next Ramanujan or something like that, right? And yes, I will say Chris is a wonderful, amazing person. But everybody, it's not like that he's a diamond in the rough. Everybody in prison is a gem. I think it's part of our callings as Christians to care about that.
Can we pray for him right now?
Yeah.
Yes, we can. Denise, would you like to lead us?
Sure. So, Father, we come to you. You're a God of love. You're a God of justice. You're a God who calls each of us to follow you. So, Father, we pray for Francis. We ask that you give him the continuing strength and heart and grace to follow you in the world of the academy and in the world of math and in the worlds where he intersects with people like Chris. And Father, we pray for Christopher, and we ask that in the depths of our unjust prison system and system of incarceration that sees everyone and brushes everyone with harsh justice that does not look like you, that must be served, but doesn't seem to serve your purposes. We ask by the power of your Holy Spirit that you would continue to reach Christopher, touch him. The lawyer and the legal system we bring before you and ask that you would continue your work of justice through the persons who your Holy Spirit touches. And Father, you said that we could ask anything in your name and you will do. And as your children whom you love, called to the academy, called to professions that serve your kingdom purpose, we come humbly today and ask that you would move. In the name of Jesus, bring justice. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Amen. I think we can have one more question. We have one back in the back where Louise is, I think. Or did we not? No, not over there. Okay. Do we have one more back there next to you, Tom?
What is the best answer to the toilet flushes during the Super Bowl question?
The best answer.
Are you have an answer?
The answer is probably something like once, because how many times is a toilet flush?
Oh, trick question. How many times is a toilet flushing? Not all the toilets.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I'm going to defer to others who have actually thought about the question carefully. But I will say that there isn't one right answer. I mean, maybe there is a good estimate. There's some estimates that are better than others. But I think part of the way we often think about this, and mathematically speaking, is here the interviewer is interested in seeing what kinds of reasons. How are you able to think about this? Right? Are you going to first break it down by, what's the population in New York City? Maybe 20 million. What fraction of those people are actually watching the Super Bowl? And so you have to. And what sources of information do I need in order to figure that out? Right? So maybe you don't have that at your disposal, but the interviewer is actually listening. Like, oh, okay, is this person resourceful? Are they going to think about this source of data or that source of data? Where are they going to get their information? That's the kind of thing that the interviewer was looking for. And whether or not they actually come close to a good estimate is probably going to depend on what sources of information they're able to find. And so I would say in that sense, it's again, not so much the answer as it is the thought process.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Francis. Let's thank him again.
Thank you.